The rain fell in whispers, soaking Elena Harper's black dress as she stood at the edge of her father's funeral. She was 28, but today she felt like a child again, small and voiceless under the weight of her family's expectations. The preacher's words blurred into the drizzle, drowned by the ache in her chest, not just for her father's death, but for the secret she'd been asked to bury deeper than his coffin. "Elena, you can't bring her," her mother had hissed 2 days ago, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Not to your father's funeral. Not in front of everyone. Keep it hidden for his sake." Elena had nodded, her throat tight, because what else could she do? Her father, Thomas Harper, had been the pillar of their small Virginia town, a deacon, a veteran, a man whose legacy demanded perfection. And perfection to her family meant Elena pretending she wasn't in love with Clara Voss. Clara stood now, a few rows back, her short black hair damp against her forehead, her blue eyes fixed on Elena. At 30, Clara carried herself with a quiet defiance, her tailored blazer a shield against the judgmental whispers of the mourners. She wasn't supposed to be here. Elena's mother had made that clear. But Clara had come anyway, because love doesn't obey ultimatums, and because she knew Elena couldn't face this day alone. The cemetery smelled of wet earth and grief. Elena's hands trembled as she clutched a single white rose, her father's favorite. She wanted to scream, to tell the world that she was more than their dutiful daughter, that her heart belonged to Clara, that love wasn't a sin to be hidden. But the weight of her mother's warning pressed down harder than the rain. "You'll ruin his memory," she'd said. "You'll shame us all." Elena's eyes flicked to her mother, standing rigid under a black umbrella, her face a mask of stoic mourning. Beside her, Elena's older brother Mark stared at the ground, his jaw tight. They'd always been close, but even he had sided with their mother this time. "Just for one day, Elena," he'd pleaded. "Don't make this about you." The words stung, slicing through the fragile hope she'd clung taut at her family might one day accept her for who she was. The preacher droned on about eternal rest, but Elena's mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment she'd met Clara 2 years ago. It was at a community art fair, of all places, in the neighboring town of Willow Creek. Elena had been selling her watercolor paintings, her fingers smudged with paint, when Clara stopped at her booth. "You've got a gift for capturing light," Clara had said, her voice warm, her smile disarming. They'd talked for hours, the world fading around them, until Elena realized she was falling for someone who really saw her for the first time. Their love had grown in stolen moments. Late-night drives along the Blue Ridge Parkway, quiet dinners in Clara's tiny apartment, whispered promises under starlit skies. But in a town where tradition ruled and church bells dictated morality, their relationship was a secret kept behind closed doors. Elena's father had known, though. She'd told him 6 months ago, hoping for understanding. He'd listened, his face unreadable, and said, "I need time, Elena." Time he'd never had. Now, as the preacher called for final words, Elena's heart pounded. She stepped forward, her legs unsteady, the rose heavy in her hand. The crowd watched, neighbors, churchgoers, distant relatives, all expecting her to play the part of the grieving daughter. She opened her mouth, but no words came. How could she eulogize a man who died without fully accepting her? How could she stand here, pretending to be someone she wasn't? Clara's gaze burned into her from behind, steady and unwavering. Elena wanted to turn, to run to her, to hold her hand and face the world together. But her mother's eyes were on her too, cold and expectant. Elena placed the rose on the coffin, her fingers lingering on the polished wood, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I tried." As she stepped back, the crowd murmured, their faces a blur of pity and judgment. Elena felt like she was drowning, her truth suffocating under the weight of their expectations. She glanced at Clara, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. It was enough to keep her standing, but not enough to break the silence. Then, a voice cut through the rain, a voice Elena didn't recognize. "May I say something?" it said, firm but kind, rising above the crowd. All heads turned, including Elena's, to see a woman standing near the back, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun, her eyes bright with purpose. She was a stranger, or so Elena thought, but there was something familiar in the way she carried herself, something that demanded attention. The preacher hesitated, then nodded. The woman stepped forward, her coat damp but her posture unyielding. "My name is Margaret," she began. her voice steady despite the murmurs rippling through the crowd. I didn't know Thomas Harper well, but I know what it means to live a life in shadows. And I know what it means to love someone you're told to hide. Elena's breath caught. Clara's hand twitched, as if she wanted to reach out. The stranger's words hung in the air, heavy with truth, and Elena felt the world shift beneath her feet. Who was this woman, and why was she speaking now, at her father's funeral, about the very thing Elena had been forced to bury? Margaret's voice carried over the cemetery, steady as the rain that continued to fall. I met Thomas Harper only once, she said, her gaze sweeping the crowd before settling on Elena. It was a few months ago, at a veterans support group in Richmond. He spoke about his daughter, his pride, his light, his Elena. Her words hit Elena like a punch, stealing her breath. The crowd stirred, some exchanging glances, others staring at Margaret with a mix of curiosity and unease. Elena's mother, Evelyn, stiffened, her umbrella tilting slightly as if to shield herself from the words. Mark shifted beside her, his eyes darting between Elena and the stranger. Elena felt Clara's presence behind her, a quiet anchor in the storm of emotions swirling inside. She wanted to turn to see Clara's face, but she couldn't tear her eyes from Margaret, who stood with a calm defiance that seemed to challenge the entire town. Thomas told me about a mistake he regretted, Margaret continued. He said he'd pushed away someone he loved, because he didn't understand her heart. He said he was trying to make it right, but time wasn't on his side. Her voice softened, but it didn't waver. I'm here because I promised him I'd speak if he couldn't. Because real love deserves to be seen, not hidden. A murmur rippled through the crowd, sharper now, edged with discomfort. Elena's heart raced. Her father had spoken about her? To this stranger? She searched Margaret's face for answers, but all she saw was a quiet resolve, a determination to finish what she'd started. Elena's mind flashed back to that conversation 6 months ago, her father's silence after she'd told him about Clara. Had he been wrestling with her truth, seeking a way to bridge the gap between them? Clara stepped closer, her shoulder brushing Elena's, a silent promise of solidarity. The touch was fleeting, but it grounded Elena, keeping her from unraveling. She glanced at her mother, whose face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Evelyn's eyes screamed disapproval, but for the first time, Elena saw a flicker of something else: uncertainty, maybe even fear. Margaret raised her chin. I know what it's like to hide who you are, she said. I loved a woman once 50 years ago, and I let the world tell me it was wrong. I lost her, and I've carried that regret every day since. The crowd went silent, the weight of her confession settling over them like the rain. Thomas didn't want that for his daughter. He wanted her to live freely, to love without shame. Elena's throat tightened, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. She felt Clara's hand slip into hers, hidden behind the folds of her dress, and she gripped it tightly. The gesture was small, but it was everything: a defiance of the rules that had kept them apart, a claim to the love they'd fought to protect. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice sharp. This is a funeral, not a soapbox. Show some respect. Her words were meant to silence Margaret, but they only fueled the tension in the air. A few mourners nodded in agreement, their faces tight with judgment, but others arts and crafts, others stood still, their eyes wide. Margaret didn't flinch. Respect means honoring the truth, she said calmly. Thomas wanted his daughter to know he loved her, all of her. I'm keeping my promise to him. She looked directly at Elena, her eyes soft but fierce. You don't have to hide, Elena. Not anymore. The words broke something open inside Elena. She felt the weight of years of silence, of pretending, of trying to fit into a world that didn't want her as she was. Clara's hand tightened in hers, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, standing together against the storm. But the storm wasn't over. Evelyn's face twisted with anger, and she turned to Elena. How dare you let this happen? She whispered, her voice venomous. This is your father's day, and you're making it about you. The accusation cut deep, echoing the guilt Elena had carried for years. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The crowd was watching now, some whispering, others glaring, and Elena felt the weight of their judgment pressing down again. Clara spoke for the first time, her voice low but clear. She's not hiding anymore, Mrs. Harper. Neither am I. She stepped forward, standing beside Elena, her presence a shield. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, but Clara didn't waver. We loved each other and we loved Thomas. That's not a betrayal. It's the truth. Elena's heart swelled, a mix of fear and pride. Clara had always been the braver one, the one who faced the world head-on while Elena hesitated, afraid of losing her family's approval. But now, with Margaret's words ringing in her ears and Clara's hand in hers, Elena felt something shift. She wasn't alone. She didn't have to hide. Mark stepped forward, his face conflicted. "Elena," he said, his voice breaking. "Is this really what Dad wanted?" The question hung between them, heavy with years of unspoken truths. Elena looked at him, her brother, the one who'd always protected her, and saw the hurt in his eyes. But she also saw a flicker of hope, a chance that he might understand. "I think so," she said softly. He just didn't know how to say it. The preacher cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Let's return to the service," he said, his voice strained. But the moment had changed everything. Elena felt it. Clara felt it. And even the crowd seemed to sense that something bigger than a funeral was unfolding. As the service continued, Elena held Clara's hand, no longer hiding. The rain kept falling, but it felt different now, like it was washing away the years of silence. Margaret stepped back, her work done, but her presence lingered, a beacon of courage Elena would never forget. The funeral ended in a blur of prayers and condolences, but Elena barely heard them. Her world had narrowed to the warmth of Clara's hand in hers, the echo of Margaret's words, and the weight of her mother's silence. As the mourners dispersed, drifting toward their cars under umbrellas, Elena and Clara lingered by the grave, the white rose stark against the dark wood of her father's coffin. "I didn't expect that," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "Not from a stranger. Not for me." Clara's blue eyes softened, but her grip was firm. "She wasn't just speaking for you," she said. "She was speaking for herself, too. For the life she didn't get to live." Clara's voice carried a quiet strength, the kind that had drawn Elena to her from the start. "And maybe for your dad." Elena nodded, tears welling again. The idea that her father had confided in Margaret, that he'd wanted to make things right, was both a comfort and a wound. She'd spent so long believing he'd never accept her, that his silence was rejection. Now she wasn't sure what to feel: grief for the conversations they'd never had, or hope that he'd been trying in his own way to understand. The cemetery was emptying, but Evelyn lingered, her umbrella now folded, her face unreadable. Mark stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the ground. The air was heavy, not just with rain but with the unspoken words between them all. Elena knew this moment would define her family, either pulling them closer or breaking them apart. "Elena," Evelyn said finally, her voice low but sharp, "we need to talk." "Not here." She glanced at Clara, her expression tightening, then turned toward the parking lot. Mark hesitated, then followed, leaving Elena and Clara alone by the grave. Clara squeezed Elena's hand. "You don't have to go," she said. "Not if it means hiding again." Elena shook her head. "I'm done hiding," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I need to know what she thinks, what she feels." She looked at Clara, her heart aching with love and fear. "Will you come with me?" "Always," Clara said, and the simplicity of the word steadied Elena's resolve. They walked to the parking lot, where Evelyn and Mark waited by the family car. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the tension was thicker than ever. Evelyn's eyes flicked to their joined hands, and for a moment Elena thought she'd turn away. But Evelyn stayed, her posture rigid, her face a mask of control. "Why didn't you tell me?" Evelyn asked, her voice breaking slightly. "About Dad. About what he said to that woman." Elena's chest tightened. "I didn't know," she said honestly. "He never told me. I thought." She swallowed, the words catching. "I thought he was ashamed of me." Evelyn's face softened, just for a moment, before the mask returned. "He was never ashamed," she said, but her voice was strained, as if the words cost her something. "He was confused. He didn't understand. But he loved you, Elena. He always did." The words hit like a wave, threatening to pull Elena under. She wanted to believe them, but years of silence had built walls too high to tear down in a single moment. Then why didn't he say it? She asked, her voice breaking. Why did he let me think I was wrong? Evelyn looked away, her hands clenching. Because he was stubborn. Because he thought he had time. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Elena saw her mother's grief not just for her husband, but for the years they'd all lost. Mark stepped forward, his voice quiet. I didn't know either, Elena, he said. I should have asked. I should have listened. His eyes met hers, full of regret. I'm listening now. Clara's presence beside her was a lifeline, her hand a reminder that Elena wasn't alone. I love her, Elena said, her voice clear despite the tremble. I love Clara and I love Dad. I don't want to choose between them anymore. Evelyn flinched, but she didn't interrupt. Mark nodded, a small gesture that felt like a bridge. The conversation was cut short by the arrival of a few lingering mourners, offering condolences, their eyes curious but cautious. Elena felt their stares, but for the first time she didn't shrink from them. She stood tall, her hand in Clara's, her heart raw but open. As they drove to the family home for the reception, the car was silent. Elena sat in the back with Clara, their fingers intertwined, while Evelyn and Mark rode in front. The tension was palpable, but so was the possibility of something new crack in the walls they'd all built. At the house, neighbors and friends filled the living room, their voices a low hum of sympathy. Elena and Clara moved through the crowd, their closeness drawing whispers, but Elena refused to let go of Clara's hand. She caught sight of Margaret across the room, speaking quietly with an older couple. Their eyes met, and Margaret gave her a small, knowing nod. The reception was a blur of casseroles and condolences, but one moment stood out. A young woman, maybe 20, approached Elena, her eyes nervous but determined. I heard what happened at the cemetery, she said softly. I just wanted to say, thank you. I'm not out yet, but seeing you today it helped. Elena's heart swelled and Clara squeezed her hand. You'll get there, Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. When you're ready, you won't be alone. The girl nodded, tears in her eyes, and slipped back into the crowd. Elena felt a spark of purpose, a sense that her father's legacy and Margaret's courage had rippled beyond this moment. As the evening wore on, Elena and Clara stepped outside, the night air cool and clear. They sat on the porch swing, the stars bright above, and for the first time all day, Elena felt like she could breathe. The porch swing creaked softly as Elena and Clara swayed under the Virginia stars. The hum of voices from inside the house faded, leaving only the chirp of crickets and the weight of the day. Elena leaned into Clara, her head resting on her shoulder, and for a moment the world felt small and safe. I keep thinking about what Margaret said, Elena murmured. About Dad wanting me to be free. Feels too late, but also like a gift. Her voice trembled, caught between grief and gratitude. Clara's arm tightened around her, a silent promise that they'd face whatever came next together. He was trying, Elena, Clara said softly. Maybe he didn't know how, but he was trying. That's something. Her voice was steady, but Elena heard the undercurrent of her own grief for the father-in-law she'd never fully know, for the years they'd all lost to silence. Inside, the reception continued, but Elena wasn't ready to face the crowd again. Not yet. She looked at Clara, her face lit by the porch light, and felt a surge of love so fierce it hurt. I don't know what happens now, she admitted. Mom, Mark. They're not going to change overnight. Clara nodded, her blue eyes steady. No, but they heard you today. They saw us. That's a start. She brushed a strand of auburn hair from Elena's face, her touch gentle but grounding. And you're not hiding anymore. That's everything. Elena smiled, tears prickling her eyes. I couldn't have done it without you, she said. Or Margaret. The memory of the stranger's voice, strong and unyielding, still echoed in her mind. It had given her the courage to hold Clara's hand, to stand tall in front of a town that had expected her to shrink. The door creaked open and Mark stepped out, his expression hesitant. Can I join you? He asked, his voice low. Elena nodded, scooting over to make room. Clara stayed close, her presence a quiet strength. I'm sorry, Elena, Mark said, his eyes fixed on the dark lawn, for making you feel like you had to choose. I didn't get it. I'm trying to now. His words were halting, but they carried a sincerity that made Elena's chest ache. Sheedy Blaze reached for his hand, tentative but real. I want to understand, Elena. I want to be your brother. Elena's throat tightened. Thanks, Mark, she said softly. I wish Dad had told me himself. I wish we'd had more time. Her voice broke and Clara's hand found hers again, a silent anchor. Mark nodded, his jaw tight. Me too, he said. But I think Margaret was right. He was proud of you. He just didn't know how to show it. He paused, then added, I'm proud of you too. The words hit Elena hard, cracking open years of doubt. She reached for his hand and for a moment they were kids again, sharing secrets under these same stars. I love you, Mark, she whispered, and he squeezed her hand back. Evelyn appeared at the door, her silhouette stiff against the warm light of the house. People are asking for you, she said, her voice clipped but not as sharp as before. Elena nodded, standing, but she didn't let go of Clara's hand. They walked inside together, the whispers of the crowd quieter now, though the weight of their stares lingered. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of small talk and casseroles, but Elena felt different, lighter somehow. She caught Margaret's eye again, and the older woman gave her a small smile as if to say, You're doing fine. Elena smiled back, her heart full. As the night wound down, Margaret approached them, her gray hair gleaming under the chandelier. I'm leaving, she said, her voice warm. But I wanted to give you this. She pressed a small, worn photo into Elena's hand, a picture of her father, younger, laughing with a woman who looked strikingly like Margaret. On the back, in his familiar scrawl, were the words, To Elena with love. Be free. Elena's breath caught, tears spilling over. How did you, she started, but Margaret shook her head. He gave it to me that day in Richmond, she said. He wanted you to have it when the time was right. She hugged Elena, then Clara, her embrace fierce and warm. Live well, both of you. As Margaret left, Elena clung to the photo, her father's handwriting a lifeline to a love she hadn't fully known. Clara pulled her close, and they stood together, the weight of the day settling into something new, something like hope. The days after the funeral blurred into a quiet rhythm of grief and healing. Elena and Clara stayed in Elena's childhood home, navigating the delicate balance of family and truth. The photo from Margaret sat on Elena's nightstand, her father's words, Be free, a constant reminder of what he'd wanted for her. Each morning, Elena traced the handwriting, feeling closer to him than she had in years. Evelyn was still guarded, her words careful, but there were moments, small ones, where Elena saw cracks in her mother's armor. One evening, Evelyn joined them on the porch, her hands clasped tightly. I don't understand everything, she said, her voice low. But I don't want to lose you, Elena. Not you too. It wasn't acceptance, not fully, but it was a step, and Clara squeezed Elena's hand, a silent promise they'd navigate this together. Mark became their ally, his apologies turning into late-night talks about their father, their childhood, and the future. I want to know you, Elena, he said one night, his eyes bright with tears. All of you. They cried together, rebuilding a bond strained by years of silence. The town talked, of course. Whispers followed Elena and Clara at the grocery store, the diner, the park. But there were also allies, unexpected ones. The young woman from the reception, whose name was Lily, started stopping by, bringing coffee and questions about coming out. Others followed, tentative but curious, drawn to the courage they'd seen at the funeral. Elena and Clara became a quiet beacon, their love a light for others still finding their way. A month later, Elena and Clara drove to Richmond, to the veterans group where Margaret had met Thomas. They found her there, sharing stories with a new group of faces. Margaret welcomed them, her eyes bright. You're carrying his light, she told Elena, and they sat together, sharing stories of love and loss until the stars came out. Back home, Elena hung her father's photo on the wall, a reminder of his unspoken love. She and Clara built a life open, unhidden, full of quiet moments and loud ones. They held hands in public, kissed under the Blue Ridge stars, and lived the freedom Thomas had wanted for his daughter. The town didn't change overnight, but it changed a little, and so did Elena's family. One night, as they sat on the porch swing, Clara pulled Elena close. We're free, she whispered, and Elena nodded, her heart full. Margaret's voice, her father's words, and Clara's love had given her Theta legacy not of shame, but of truth. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.